A short story by Paul McCann, Where Rainbows Rise. Beyond the rainbow there is a magical road across the sky that brings fairies to home and a place near Fairy Lake. But long before the fairies ever found the magic road, there were other dwellers of the lake. Once in that long ago time, these creatures called Flossers were the only known inhabitants of Fairy Lake. Some of the Flossers couldn't get along, no matter how hard they tried, and so they found it was best to separate into two tribes. So on one side of the lake, there were the green-thumbed Flossers, who were very talented gardeners, and on the other side of the lake were the woodworking skilled builders, Flossers, and they all turned into a tribe of their own. It was said that they could do their own thing. The green-thumbed Flossers could grow vegetables on a rock, but apart from being great gardeners, they were also expert chefs as well. They were always able to cook some new dishes and were able to live happily on their spot of Fairy Lake. They never bothered to mix much with their neighbours across the other side of the lake. On the other side of the lake, the Flossers, known as the Woodmasters, were busy drilling and filling holes, sandpapering and stapling and painting and writing and grouting and planning and planing and staining with their hammers and glue. They knew what to do, and they were a happy crew. They all seemed to work very well with wood. On the other side, of course, the green-thumbed Flossers were always busy working in the golden fields by the lake. The Flossers on each side of Fairy Lake sang, as they worked, little songs they had made up. Happy tribes on both sides of the lake. It was sad that they could never get along well together. There were fights, and sometimes they would shout over, "Get a real job!" and other sort of comments. Trouble was always on the boil between them both, the warring tribes. But this is the story of how they became friends. It all began one day when the fishing Flossers' boat sank upon the lake, and because their catch was lost, the Flossers faced hunger for a while. As the days went on, they began to get more hungry, and so the Woodmasters began to build bigger and stronger boats for their people. But again, they sunk to the bottom of Fairy Lake. With talk of sabotage and revenge on the cards, a meeting was called for, and all suggestions were taken to solve this crisis. And the tribe leader, Scruffy Floss, he stood before the entire tribe of Woodmasters, and he said, "We have a problem on the lake. I think an unseen force is sinking each boat that we put out. So we are unable to catch the fish unless we get some food soon. We're going to perish. Some of us have for the first time felt hunger pains that we have never known. I want to suggest that we ask the green thumbs for help." It was deadly quiet then. Fluffy Floss stood up, and he broke the silence. "Who among us wants to go through another day with no food?" No one answered. And then Scruffy said, "Seems to me, fellow Flossers, that we have no other alternative. We must ask the Flossers across the lake for some food. Maybe in return we could build them some homes." Unbeknownst to them, on the other side of the lake, the Green Thumbs were also having a meeting. The word had come that a cosmic hurricane was heading down from the Sky Road and would soon be there in a short time, and suggestions were called for. On one side, there were flossers with empty bellies, and on the other side there were flossers with grave fears of the impending doom. Teddy Floss was a popular spokesman for the Green Thumbs, and he stood up at the meeting and he said, my friends, I feel we must reach out to ask for help. When this storm hits us, the lake will rise. We need to build walls to keep our water out. If we don't, all of us will be drowned. I suggest that we ask the wood masters to build us the walls, and in return we will supply them with food and drink and cook for them as long as it takes. After many hours of arguing and debating, the motion was carried. The leaders of each of the tribes, they stood there on both sides of the river lake, and they signaled for a truce by sending over a white dove across the lake. The dove brought a message from each tribe. After a brief discussion, the doves were returned with the agreement for both two tribes to help one another. The work began fast. A bridge was built by the wood masters across Fairy Lake. They called it Rainbow Bridge. At last, there was a common goal, and a newfound friendship was found. With confidence, the Green Thumbs brought food to the hungry woodmaster flossers, and they started to cook up a huge feast for all of the woodworkers who were starving. Once they had eaten, their strength had returned, and they began to take their tools and timber across the Rainbow Bridge. Soon tall walls were erected on both sides of Fairy Lake to keep out the flood waters, and they had finished the wall just in time. The hurricane arrived, and a flurried frenzy of wild winds brought debris and mayhem, and yet the walls stood firm. The water in Fairy Lake rose higher and higher and scurried up the walls. The flood waters were kept at bay, and suddenly there came an end to the storm. When the flood water had subsided, the flossers saw that something very special had happened. There were some new things growing on both sides of the lake. At first they looked like young trees, but as the days went on, pink fairy floss trees stood tall and proud all around Fairy Lake. It was as if some supernormal beings had left them a gift. Peace between the two tribes was now a reality. The flossers lived in peace and harmony all around Fairy Lake. Some other creatures too came instead. As the story goes, if you ever see a rainbow in the sky, remember that storms may come and go, but one thing never changes. We must all try to live together in peace. The end.